This is going to be an overly complicated graph, but it shows some really cool stuff because there's actually 4 variables going on at the same time here that we're able to see how they sort of coincide with one another. So first, we've got this background blue line. This is not part of what's going to be an animated graph. That's just there to sort of refer to as to the entire length of our pandemic and seeing where we had these peaks and troughs and waves and just having an understanding of the overall level of case rate in the province. So this is actually a graph of the average number of cases in the previous 7 days. So right now we're, getting up above 200, but there's no scale on here. It's just higher and lower sort of background. So that's like a picture, and then this is going to be an animated graph by time, and the big April 25th here, which is our start time, that is going to tick forward day by day, and every value that you see that's graphed is actually a 7-day average. So it wasn't until about April 18th that the province started releasing age-related case data of how many cases we had per 0 to 19-year-old, 20 to 39-year-old, 40 to 59, 60 to 79, and 80 plus. Next, we've got our x-axis, and I've termed this representation. You can imagine that if we have 100 cases in the population, and those were not at all sort of enhanced for age, where everybody had an equal chance of getting it, we might expect to have the number of cases per age bin exactly proportional to the number of people in that age group. So you can imagine that if we had, 10% of the population is over the age of 80 and 10% of the cases were in over 80-year-olds, their representation value would be 1. So we can sort of say if you are to the right for representation, you're overrepresented. There are more cases in your age group than we would find in the overall population. And if you are shifted to the left of the 1, there are less cases in your age group than we would expect in the overall population. And then we also have this y-axis here, which is our incidence. It's the number of cases per 100,000 in that age group. So this can move up and down for each of these bubbles completely independently of one another, because if we had an outbreak in a school, the 0 to 19 would go up. If we had an outbreak in long-term care, the 80 plus would go up. If we had an outbreak in a workplace where, just generic adults were in there, maybe both the 20 to 40 and the 40 to 60 would both go up, right? But they can each go up independently. And then the last thing is the bubble size is the number of actual raw cases that we're seeing in that age group. So what you can sort of think about is that if things are moving to the right, overrepresented, underrepresented, higher amount of that age getting cases, lower amount of that age getting cases, raw case numbers, which is proportional to just it's not divided per 100,000 or anything like that. It's just the number of people who are infected, and time is going to keep ticking. So I'm going to let you watch this, and then I'm going to sort of break down some of the things that I see in this graph as it actually goes by. So right now, you just see a lot of what I sort of think of as like water skidding across a hot cast iron pan sort of thing. Our case numbers are so low that each individual case changes the proportions and the representation here, but all the circles are small and nothing has a high incidence. It's essentially we're just in these really low numbers. Then we start to see a couple of those early outbreaks on the colonies and things like that, but those sort of die down again, and we're about to enter, hitting sort of early October, the start of our second wave right around Thanksgiving. You'll see as the circles all start to get bigger, and as all the incidence goes up, things get a little tighter closer to the 1 because we do have more sort of proportional cases all over. I'm going to go through this, so I'm not going to sort of narrate the whole thing. Okay, so all of that skidding around, we're going to skip over that, and what we're going to jump into is start of our second wave. What we're going to see is we've got more cases in the 20 to 39-year-olds, public-facing, frontline workers, people in restaurants, people who are working in grocery stores, people who are working in hospitals, people who are working in meatpacking plants, like all of these things where, you know, younger people are working these jobs. It's not just super spreader events at, you know, the karaoke bar, things like that, although those did contribute, as did some super spreader events in churches and other things. But sort of getting in here, we can see that, you know, we've got cases in children, cases in the sort of age group that would be their parents, and these are probably about equally represented and both starting to rise. These were people who were probably without kids and working. Older people are still really low numbers here, and what we'll see is overall 60 to 79 usually stays quite low because they're more likely to be independently living, not sort of communally living, so you don't have as many super spreader events as you would in long-term care. But the 80 plus, while we tried to keep sort of protected, once it got into long-term care, it was very easily spread, and we saw high incidence and sort of these numbers going up, and also we'll see them starting to shift. So getting into about mid-November here, we're about to see the first long-term care outbreaks in the province. And we've gone from about a proportion of about half as many cases in the 80 and up as we would expect. And what we're going to see is over the course of just a week or two, it is now about 50% overrepresented than what we would expect. Highest incidence, not as huge because there's not as many people in that age group as all the others, and everything else is starting to sort of cluster around, you know, this sort of central point of everything's represented equally in the community. Got a few of these long-term care outbreaks, so things will sort of spike up and spike back, but we're also going to continue to see retail workers, hourly sort of workers who are going to be overrepresented in that big orange bubble. We're also going to see slightly older workers, the 40 to 59s, 60 to 79s, quite low. And right now, at least, schools are underrepresented or children are underrepresented in our COVID cases. So you can see that it's actually quite a big spread between the green, or I don't know, teal, I guess, the teal, which is the children, and both of the sort of potential parental age groups. The orange might be parents of younger kids, the purple might be parents of older kids, right? So what we're going to see is getting into December here, everything sort of tightens up because we are really sort of hitting in this peak area. Around here is where we introduced masks. Around here is where we sort of introduced tighter household bubbles. That brought our numbers down, but some of that was under testing because we didn't do as much testing over the Christmas, spring, holiday, New Year's break. But once we sort of started testing again, we shot back up. Probably we would have seen less of a dip there. Some of this might have been over testing, sort of catching up on all those cases that we missed, and then things are going to drop again. So we can see there's still a couple more long-term care outbreaks. The 80 and up bubble still goes higher than all the rest. 60 to 79, still pretty low because they're sort of independently living, taking care of themselves, keeping themselves out of COVID's way. Things dip down into the Christmas break here. Things sort of quell a little bit. Another long-term care outbreak in the end of December there. Things drop down and spike up again. And we're going to start to see in mid-February, we might expect that we've started to get enough vaccination that we might be able to stop any kind of long-term care outbreak, any kind of senior home or things like that, right? And what we would expect is that that should bring our green bubble under 1. It should be underrepresented. The case rate should drop compared to all the rest. Previously, the last sort of month and a half, 2 months here, 80 and up has always been near the top of the highest incidence and the sort of overrepresented. And what we're going to see is that it's going to start to trend down here. So things sort of settle down in February here. Our numbers are low, number of new cases per day. So we're sort of getting into this point here. Things are nicely dropping. Start to have a couple outbreaks here. But check this out around mid-February. Our 80 and up is now underrepresented by about half, Right now it's at the same rate as the 60 to 79-year-olds, which it really hasn't been before, and it's going to continue to keep dropping, shifting down and shifting left, which tells us that vaccination is working. It's actually protecting these individuals from COVID. But what we're going to see as well is our 0 to 19-year-olds are now slightly overrepresented than their parents, and the 20 to 39-year-olds as well. And as we enter this variant third wave, because it's more transmissible, we started to see more transmission in workplaces, more transmission in public-facing jobs, and even more transmissions in schools, way more school outbreaks in March than most months sort of put together because it's just that much more transmissible. So what we're going to see here is that for a short period of time, the kids were sort of above the older adults. Like right there, you can sort of see that spread. But it is all going to sort of tighten up once again as we sort of hit this third wave. So both the 0 to 19s, 20 to 39s, and 40 to 59-year-olds all are going to increase and sort of cluster. But the 80 and up, we're going to see continues to drop with vaccination until at the very end here, it's only about a third of what we would expect for the 80 and up cases if it was, again, equally spread across the population. Our 60 to 79-year-olds are probably starting to see the benefits of vaccination as well because they haven't been sucked up to this sort of equal representation point of the third wave that all these other age groups have. And this is showing us vaccination works, but it's also showing us who we need to vaccinate next, right? It's always been these front-facing workers, these 20 to 39-year-olds who are in the high-risk jobs because they're just out in public. We should be preferentially vaccinating them according to NACI guidelines because they're more likely to get COVID, especially in the case of these variants. Closing restaurants and things like that is a way to protect them and ensure that they can get federal funding. Hopefully, we're going to see as our schools have been shut down, in Regina and things like that, our 0 to 19s are going to start to come down and be less represented. Although, if everything's equal, everything should be around 1 no matter what. But overall, things should sort of drop down and the size of these bubbles should shrink. So a graph like this is sort of interesting in that we can think, what are we going to look forward to in the future? What we're going to see is the 80 is going to continue to drop, then the 60 to 79 is going to continue to drop, and then we're going to start to see our 40 to 59 bubble drop, right? All of these are going to become less and less represented in the population of cases compared to the overall rate because they've been vaccinated. And then what we're going to see is that the 20 to 39s and the 0 to 19-year-olds, those are going to start to predominate and they're going to shift further over sort of into the higher numbers over 1 for this representation. So that's all the stuff that you can see in this kind of cool graph.